Yo, what is up guys? It is Bumfris, back with another episode of Entitled Parents. This episode is an absolute banger and I guarantee you're gonna want to stick around for this one. Before we get into the video, do me a huge favor and please smash that like button for 675,000 Bumfris points. And if you are new, don't forget to smash that subscribe button as well. Then sit back, relax, and get annoyed at some entitled parents. We had a couple of hundred cars and other motor vehicles stored at any given time. The neighborhood kids, which were older teens and some were actually adults, liked to break in and steal personal items left in the cars. Wallets, radios, GPS units, etc. If they stole the radio out of the dash, they'd rip the dash apart, so we'd have to replace the radio and repair the dish. It would be a very expensive repair. We had a 6+ foot high fence topped with razor wire and an alarm. They'd find ways over it. Usually they just throw a mattress onto the razor wire and hop over using a car. To protect ourselves, we put up an electric fence inside of our security fence, which was the one topped with razor wire. The electric fence was 6 feet inside the outer fence. The neighborhood parents then decided that they were up in arms about our complete disregard for their children. The local councilman and police lieutenant came to me asking what we could do to calm the neighbors. Mind you, the electric fence was installed with the blessing of the local government, fully permitted and licensed. I told the politician, who was the real mouthpiece, that we would not be disarming or removing the fence. He then told me that the neighbors were very concerned for their children. I asked him which neighbors were the most vocal and he told me. I looked to the lieutenant and told him that those were the kids to look into when there were burglaries and thefts in the area. The politician asked why. I told him that the parents most worried about their kids were the ones that had kids that knew they were climbing the other fence and stealing and vandalizing cars. Then I took them to show the fence. You would seriously think that the councilman would have taken a closer look at the setup, but he only looked at the big yellow high voltage warning signs. When we got to the storage facility, the lieutenant laughed. The councilman looked like he walked in on his wife in bed with his best friend. He was mad and surprised at the same time. They looked at the setup and the electric fence was 2 full steps inside the property. There was no way to accidentally contact it from the sidewalk. The only way to get to it would be to climb the outer security fence. The kids weren't allowed in there ever, under any circumstances. It didn't take long for the councilman to learn that he'd been played by the neighbors. The lieutenant was fairly entertained. He actually laughed. Then, the councilman said something politically correct and left. I looked at the lieutenant and we talked about the families that were really upset about the fence. They outed themselves as the suspects in a number of crimes. One of the older kids would shoot someone about 2 years later. He would actually end up getting caught on a stolen ATV from our other location. The lieutenant chuckled and said, "Now I have to figure out what to say to the parents of these crooks." I said tell them I want to know if they prefer their delinquents regular or extra crispy. I mean, how dumb as a parent do you really have to be to out your children as some of the only suspects in a pretty serious crime? Like, there is absolutely no way that this fence would have been a concern to anybody had they have just stayed off the property. Why you would go to the police or the council of all people about an issue like this, I just don't know. I guess any entitled parent who just thinks that it's okay for their kids to run around committing crimes with absolutely no consequences deserves whatever happens to them and their kid. I deliver newspapers as a side job. I feel so bad for the owner of one specific house that I deliver to. All of the neighborhood parents collectively decided that this guy's driveway is where they'd wait with all of their kids for the school bus every morning. It really shouldn't be an issue, but the parents socialize on the curb, ignoring their children. The kids run rampant on this guy's property, chasing each other around his cars, running across his lawn, playing in his garden, and screaming on his front steps at 8 AM. I'm pretty sure the homeowner isn't okay with this at all, but the parents and kids treat him and his property with major disrespect anyway. This winter, we've had a lot of freezing and thawing, resulting in several inch thick ice almost everywhere, including this dude's driveway. After one particular rainy day, followed by a freezing night, everyone's driveway looks similar to a skating rink. Just as I got out of my car to deliver the paper, the homeowner is coming out of his house, heading towards his car. One of the mothers approaches him and instantly asks, "Why isn't your driveway salted?" The homeowner responds, "I really don't have time to do that. I'm running late for work and I gotta pick up breakfast on the way." This response, however, wasn't good enough for the entitled mum, who begins yelling about how her precious kids could get hurt while playing on this guy's property. She calls him selfish and irresponsible as he explains that clearing his driveway for her kids isn't his job and that they shouldn't be playing there anyways. He finally gets past the entitled mum, into his car, and quickly drives away. The entitled mum walks back to the group of parents to complain about the homeowner as I get back in my car. This happened a few months back, but the parents still gather in this dude's driveway to let their kids mess with his crap every morning. I feel really bad for that guy. I reckon this dude knew he was about to have a bad day the moment he saw this Karen walking down the driveway about to absolutely unload on him. We haven't had many stories lately where their precious child deserves this and that just because of how special they are, but this story, as far as entitled parents go, I genuinely think takes the cake. This story happened a week or two ago. We had these entitled parents come into the shelter with their brood of kids. When I say brood, I mean like 6 or 7. I couldn't keep count as they were running around the shelter, acting like it was a playground and freaking the dogs out and pissing the staff off. The entitled mum never really said much, just kind of kept in the back on her phone. Most of the interaction here was through the entitled dad, the focal point of this story. So they came in looking for a high energy dog that is also good with kids. We asked them the basic questions, one of which is if they have any other animals in the house. This is to gauge which dogs we can show them, as some dogs in our shelter will kill another dog on sight, so we have to be careful. Luckily, they have no other animals at home. We show them one of our young and very high energy dogs that loves to play with kids, but hasn't liked other dogs in the shelter. We inform them of the dog's history as far as we know. They like the dog and adopt him, knowing full well that he needs to be an only dog. Now, days later, we got a litter of small lab pups turned in. As we are getting them set up in the kennels, in comes the entitled dad, the entitled mum, and the brood of kids with the dog that we adopted out to them. They want to find the dog a new friend. We tell them that the dog wasn't dog friendly when he was here, and we reminded them that we recommended that he be an only dog. Nothing doing, they wanted another dog, and the one they wanted just so happens to be one of the small lab puppies. At this point, the staff is looking at each other shocked because we know that this puppy would die if the older dog just decided to grab it by the head and shake it. We try to tell them that the puppy is way too small and wouldn't be able to defend itself if it was attacked. The entitled dad scoffs and says that the older dog loves other dogs and plays with his neighbor's small dogs all the time. We tell the entitled dad that we cannot, in good conscience, adopt the puppy to them because of the older dog showing signs of aggression towards other dogs in the shelter. Now, at this point, the entitled dad is throwing a tantrum. He's demanding the puppy and we simply tell him no and repeat our reasons why. It's at this point that the entitled dad says he wants to surrender the older dog and adopt the puppy then. We all look at him like the a-hole that he is and tell him that we are not going to do that. He storms outside with the entitled mum and the brood, and the entitled dad and entitled mum are arguing in the front yard of our shelter when a young couple walks by. The guy says something to the entitled dad and points at the dog, and the entitled dad says something back, and the guy shakes his head and walks into our front office and tells us that the entitled dad just tried to give away the older dog to them. We are beyond furious by now, and when the entitled dad storms back in with the dog, he demands to surrender the dog. We say fine, and we take the dog back and set him up in a kennel, and then the entitled dad demands to adopt the puppy. We once again tell him no, and the entitled dad freaks out, demanding the older dog back while having a complete tantrum meltdown in our office. Because he didn't fill out the surrender paperwork, sadly, we had to give him the older dog back because legally, it was still his property. He storms back out of the office and entitled dad and the brood leave with the older dog. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. The very next day, the entitled dad comes back with the older dog by himself and once again demands to surrender the dog. Now, it's because the dog apparently bit one of his kids in the face and the entitled dad rants about suing us, but we reminded him that when he adopted the dog, it became his property and his responsibility. After we make sure he signs the dog over, he again demands the puppy. We tell him no again, and here's the kicker. That morning, we got calls from his neighbors reporting him for leaving the dog locked in an outside cage night after night that the entitled dad has had the older dog. The neighbor said that the dog rarely ever got to leave the cage despite almost freezing temperatures that week. We informed the entitled dad that not only was he not getting the puppy, he also wasn't getting the older dog back either. And now, he and his family were on a do not adopt blacklist for the state and wouldn't be adopting anything from anywhere from now on. The entitled dad just sits there in silence and storms out of the office and ran to his car. I've never seen someone so hell-bent on getting out of here. You know, just for a second, I want to completely take away the entitled side of this story and just say how horrible it is that this person was ever allowed to adopt a dog in the first place. I know that the shelter had no way of knowing what this person was like, but I just think it's so horrible that a person like this is even allowed to adopt a pet. When you get a pet, it becomes part of the family, and when you treat it like rubbish, you're treating one of your family members like rubbish as well. If the entitled dad's happy to treat such a helpless animal like this, I can't begin to imagine how he treats other people. I was still in elementary school when this happened, so my memory could be a bit fuzzy. There was a house to the left that was being rented out by the grandson of the builder and designer of the home. A family that lived all the way across the state moved in. I assumed that they wanted to get away from the big city and settle down in a small town. They had a 3-year-old daughter that we will call Gia. They allowed my sister and I to play with this little girl. The first day we had a blast and I was looking forward to playing with her again. The second time she came over, she wanted to hold my old English bantam. I let her explore the chicken coop and I let her pet and hold her last time. All she wanted to do was pick up the chicken, and when she would drop it off or if it would somehow escape, she would chase it down. I was trying to distract her from the chicken. It worked because she found another distraction, and that was that she broke at least 3 flower pots. My mum was supervising the whole time, and she did not like that she did that. She sent her home, and that was the last time that she was invited over. Despite what she did, we were not going to hold it against the neighbours. We didn't know it at the time, but it was a red flag. My mum always wanted a garden. Ever since I could remember, she had a garden with every single vegetable that you could think of. I loved being in the garden and playing near the garden as a kid. And one day, when my mum was outside picking tomatoes, she noticed that the tomatoes were missing. And one day, when my mum was having a cup of coffee, she caught the dad and his daughter sneaking into the garden with a bucket. When she confronted him about it, he was just trying to claim that he just wanted to show his daughter the garden. I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, parents don't go into other people's garden multiple times a week with their kids. I guess he was trying to claim that he was teaching his daughter about plants. The only thing he taught her was how to steal. After about 1.5 years, they decided to make their own garden and place it right next to the fence area where we could always see it. Every time they would run into each other, he would try to boast about how well their garden is doing, what they're planting, etc. One day he threatened to call animal control on my dogs because they bark 24/7. There is also this wooden area behind our house. The dogs are responsible for protecting the chickens from raccoons, possums, foxes, and gosh knows what else there could be in there. The next day, my mum was probably giving the dogs water. He was tending to the garden and he turned to my mum and said, "This is where our zucchini plants are gonna go." After 1.5 years, their garden had failed miserably. At this point, they had 3 kids. He started taking all 3 of his kids to steal more tomatoes. My mum would confront him again and again, but he would always just blame his children. He and his wife were horrible parents. As soon as the kids could walk, they were allowed to run around the neighborhood naked, climb the neighbors' trees, etc. When she had her 4th child, she would let it sit outside in a high chair for hours in the heat while they sat inside doing gosh knows what. Things only got worse. They would end up stealing other vegetables until eventually my mum lost faith in her garden. Within 3 years, it went from being a diverse vegetable utopia to a patch of weeds taller than me. For whatever reason, my mum would not call the police or CPS or do anything. She was never the type of person to stand up for herself, and when she does, she would feel guilty about it. The other neighbours have threatened to call CPS, but they never did. They eventually got evicted and they were forced to pay thousands of dollars worth of damages. What happened to the house is a story in itself. Let's just say, the damages were so bad that you would think the house was ransacked. It's not very often that the entitled parents actually stoop as low as stealing things, but when they do, you know that it's pretty damn bad. Getting to the end of that story and hearing that they got evicted brought me just a little bit of joy, because any kind of revenge on an entitled parent makes it all that much more worth it. Alright everyone, that is going to be that for today's episode of Entitled Parents. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I personally really enjoyed the stories in today's episode, so if you did as well, please don't forget to smash that like button below and also leave a comment letting me know which one was your favorite story. I'm not going to drag this one out too much, but I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who watches my videos. You are all amazing and I appreciate each and every single one of you. Otherwise though, you are going to see a couple of videos on your screen right now. I would highly recommend that you click on one of those and watch it as soon as possible, and you will not be disappointed. But other than that, it is going to wrap things up for today's episode of Entitled Parents. So I just want to say again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for an episode of Choosing Beggars. Bye.